Hello, everybody. It is Sunday night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Paul Zeise, our Post-Gazette sports columnist, for our Steelers post-game show after probably the wildest game we have ever covered on this channel, Paul. Certainly one of the wilder Steeler games in recent memory. The Steelers beat the Baltimore Ravens on a last-second field goal. A missed last-second field goal by the Ravens. They will go to the playoffs. They will host the Houston Texans next Monday night back at Acrisure Stadium. The Ravens go home after seeming to have had the game won multiple times. Truly a wild night at the stadium. Got a few technical difficulties here with Paul, so I'll just continue to set up the show and say this show is presented by FanDuel. We also want to thank Pella Windows and Doors. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Paul, we got you back here. I'm just going to let you go off. What did you witness tonight?
I witnessed two bad football teams, and one of them had to win, and it became, in the end of the game, the race to see which team figured out how to not lose. I don't know. I don't even know what to think about this game. The blown coverages, the missed field goals, the just absolutely ridiculous ending to this game. But you know what? It is what it is. They won. The Steelers won. They go to the playoffs, and then now it's a new season. I can't believe how many different ways the Ravens find to lose these games always. And so, hey, you got to make the plays that are there to be made to, when it's time to win the game. And I just feel like it's one of those things where they made just enough plays to win. And, again, the Ravens made just enough plays to lose. So now they'll go play the Texans. And, I don't know that the Texans are unbeatable. So we'll see. And I think it could be a really difficult really difficult game because of the Texans defense. But at the end of the day, they found a way. So that's really all you can say.
You can hear the clamor at Acrisure Stadium. People are fired up. Paul is in the cafeteria area. So we apologize for the noise, but there's a lot of excitement, as I'm sure you at home are feeling as well. Paul, I was going to start with talking about the defense and saying at the end of the day, 4 big blown assignments, tackle coverages, whatever you want to say, cost the Steelers at the end. I don't think we can start there, though, because you talk about them making the plays to win the game. That was on offense tonight. It was Aaron Rodgers in that fourth quarter finding Calvin Austin down that left side for the go-ahead touchdown. It was the drive before that with the Kenneth Gainwell touchdown that looked like it might at least send the game to overtime if you could hold the Ravens to a field goal. The offense answered the bell in this game, Paul. No DK Metcalf. I think that has to be the headline here, right?
Well, yeah, they made some big plays. I mean, they were able to make some plays. I thought, a couple plays to Freiermuth. I thought the play down the sideline to Austin. They ran the ball pretty well, I thought. Offensively, they were able to just sort of take advantage of what, the Ravens couldn't do. One of the biggest, I think, turn of events in the entire game was when Hamilton went out with a concussion. And if you remember, as soon as he went out with a concussion, they started attacking basically right where he would be. And I think that was a big part of, why they were able to take advantage of late in the game, getting the ball down the field. Injuries are a part of it. And I thought you take him out of a defense that's shaky already, it changes everything. And I thought Rodgers really just sort of settled in and found his game.
Yeah, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers' night. 31 of 47, 294 yards, 6.3 per attempt, I think purely based on the fact that he threw it. I believe that is the season high, Paul. I'll look that up after, I throw it to you. But 47 throws, takes the 2 sacks, gets the 1 touchdown. early on, he looked lost. He looked like we've seen him at times. I think specifically about the Buffalo game where he just seemed to be firing blanks. They were in a lot of 3rd and 10, 2nd and 10 situations. And then things just kind of seemed to flip as soon as Kyle Hamilton came out of the game. What did you see from the quarterback tonight that maybe gives you some faith that you can upset a very good Houston Texans team that, yes, you're the higher seed, but the Texans are almost certainly going to be favored when the line comes out here shortly from our friends at FanDuel?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I would tell you is, they sort of unleashed him and, they let him kind of just play. And, for a lot of this season, it's felt like that they haven't been able to let him play and let him make plays. And I think tonight they basically said, hey, backs against the wall, backs against the wall. We've got to do it. We've got to do something here. And I think that's where, it was at the end of the day. He actually was the guy that probably was the difference in this game.
Yeah, I certainly felt so. Obviously, the Ravens defender slipping on that final touchdown by Calvin Austin was, a big help. Who was the other MVP for you offensively, Paul? Kenneth Gainwell finishes with 8 catches, 64 yards, adds another 10 on the ground. Calvin Austin has that touchdown, but had 3 catches on the night for 55 yards. Pat Freiermuth, finally, a heavy dose of him. People have been calling for it for seemingly months at this point. He comes up with some huge plays, finishes the night with 3 catches for 51 yards. Adam Thielen had that big catch earlier in the game to set up a score. What can you say about this pass-catching group, broadly speaking, and how they played tonight?
No, I thought they made some tough catches. I thought Marquez Valdes-Scantling had a really tough catch across the middle. Freiermuth obviously played pretty well. I still don't know that they have Jonnu Smith on the right page, or whatever's going on with him. But Calvin Austin made some big plays for them. Yeah, I mean, tonight Aaron Rodgers did a good job of getting the ball spread around. And I think that was the biggest thing. He was able to move the ball and get it around. And when you do that, you can overcome some things, but it really should be emphasized that Baltimore's defense is not very good against the pass. And so that helps. I imagine next week when they play the Texans, it'll be a little bit more difficult to throw the ball down the field and do the things they were able to do tonight. But tonight's all that matters. You needed to get yourself into the playoffs, and they did, and there they are.
Paul, were you concerned that they seemed to get away from a running game that was working for long chunks of the game? I think if you look at the final stats, maybe not quite so much. 24 carries for 100 yards. Aaron Rodgers had 1 carry for 20, so I don't know that you can count that in terms of the rushing success. It was more of a broken play. Then Jaylen Warren leads the team with 66 yards on 14 carries, averages 4.7 per touch. I looked at one point, I think at the end of the first half, Paul, he'd thrown it 25 times and they'd rushed 8. And I said, that doesn't seem like a recipe for success. But as we mentioned earlier, you've kind of just put the game in Rodgers' hands. Were you okay with that, or would you like to see more of the run, especially as we look ahead toward next week?
Well, I thought they ran the ball okay, and I thought they did but I think coming into this game, if you look at the stats and you look at the numbers and you look at the Ravens defense, the way to beat them is to throw the ball. They're bad against the pass. Against the run, they're like 10th, 11th in the league, but against the pass, they're one of the worst pass defenses. So I had no problem putting the ball in Aaron Rodgers' hands and letting him throw it around, because especially they lost a couple of guys early, and then they lost Hamilton. You know what? A bad secondary got even worse.
In the chat, they're talking about the priest blessing the end zone with holy water before the game. I think that picture really got around on social media tonight. You wonder if that was an influence on the Steelers tonight. Paul, let's talk about some of the other guys on this offense. Specifically, let's not talk about guys. Let's talk about moments, because I think the big controversy early in the game was when they went for that 4th down at the end of the half, come away with no points instead of 3 points, going for the touchdown. Mike Tomlin said at halftime to Melissa Stark on NBC that they were playing to win the game, and that he liked going for it there. I saw you say on Twitter you liked the call to go for it. You didn't like the play call to Kenneth Gainwell. talk me through that and how it almost cost the Steelers their season, had the Ravens not missed that final kick.
I honestly think that it's one of those things where I hate running wide there. I know, it worked for the one touchdown late in the game, but to me, I didn't have a problem with what they did in terms of going for it. I had a bigger problem with them going for it, on their own 40 early or whatever, 45. I thought they should have punted there. It cost them 3 points. But down on the end zone, down there at the end zone, they're going for a touchdown. The counter to that, and people push back on me against the chat, was if you take the 3 there, you get the ball after the half. You know what I mean? You can double score. I didn't have a problem. I just hated the play call. And I thought, they're basically putting they're basically putting their ability to score on one play in Pat Freiermuth's ability to block, and he's not a good blocker. I thought there was a lot of other good plays, the better plays that they could have ran in order to score.
Well, as Chris Collinsworth pointed out on the broadcast, you had one guy to block too. So even if Pat Freiermuth was a phenomenal run blocker, the call was just poor, and Rodgers didn't seem to see what the Ravens were doing on that play. Because you could have just if you didn't like the call and you didn't like what they were shifting into, you could have just taken the penalty and kicked the field goal. Anyway, I think that was my problem with it, is that it was obvious at the line that it wasn't going to work, and they didn't just take the penalty and kick the 3.
Right.
So, and here's another thing, and I think it's worth for spinning forward to next week talking about, Paul. The Steelers just seem to be getting away from their DNA here late in the season. Mike Tomlin seems to be itching to go for it on these fourth downs, and at moments where I don't know that I had the confidence that the Steelers could convert. I mean, we've seen the Steelers offense struggle pretty much since that Detroit game. What would give you the faith that you're going to convert in that situation? We talked about it last week. They took 3 points off the board, and it loomed large at the end of the game where you needed to get the touchdown instead of having a chance to kick the field goal. What do you make of Mike Tomlin's more aggressive posture here late in the season and how it plays into next week going into the game against the Texans?
No, I mean, I don't mind it, but I think sometimes he loses his mind about it. Again, the going for it on fourth at your own 40 early in the game like that was stupid. I hated that from the start. I said it even before they went out there with the tush push, because it was more than a yard. To me, you're going down 7-0, punt the ball. You know what I mean? Don't give them 3 points, which you essentially did. And at the end of the day, those are decisions that really define a game one way or the other. And again, I didn't hate going for it down at the end zone, but I think Mike Tomlin, one of the reasons that he wins a lot of games, and is that he's willing to kick and punt and take points, and you know what I mean. So I like that he's more aggressive now, but I think he needs to find a little bit of a balance between the two, going for it all the time, and also basically being in a situation where you're a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Lions, as Dan Campbell and the Lions is famous for going for the fourth downs, listen, I get it. You have the reason to be confident in that situation. It's just there's moments he's picked with this offense that haven't felt right and may have made tonight a little less of a sweat for him on the sidelines. So, I think that's certainly going to be a talking point in the week ahead. Paul, let's talk a little bit about this defense. Before we do, we want to thank another couple of sponsors. Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci are Pittsburgh's mesothelioma and asbestos attorneys, standing up for victims of mesothelioma and asbestos cancers with over 85 years of experience. They know how to uncover the truth. They have the experience you need, the commitment your family deserves. They've recovered millions for individuals affected by mesothelioma and other cancers due to asbestos exposure. Call them toll-free at 1-877-227-6558 or visit them online at sdklaw.com. We also want to thank FanDuel and remind you to check out the latest AFC odds over there. The Steelers are not done. They are in it. We'll have to see what their conference odds here are, and make sure you check them out if you feel good after tonight and want to bet on the Steelers to take it the rest of the way for a Super Bowl championship. Paul, I think defensively tonight, the four breakdowns really stand out. There are people that are in the chat still angry with Mike Tomlin for how that unfolded. It was the same action too, Paul. It was kind of that left to the right the bunch formation to the right and you send the guy to the left. They lost the guy 3 separate times, including on the play that would have set up the field goal to win the game for the Ravens. What did you see in terms of why the breakdowns seem to keep happening for this defense tonight?
Well, the one touchdown, actually, when we were sitting in the press box, you could see that Flowers got lost, and then he came breaking out of the pack, and it's like, wait a minute, he's wide open. Who is on him? I think there was just a miscommunication on that one. The one, they looked like they had a sack. Lamar Jackson gets out of the sack, and the next thing you know, you got Patrick Queen trying to, defend Flowers. It's miscommunications, period. It's what it is. It's just, you can't have those kind of breakdowns in your secondary. And I think that's one of the things that you have to, really kind of figure out and take a look at and say, what are we doing wrong here?
Yeah, no. And that was the word we talked about late in the season last year, Paul, right? It was communication. In training camp, that was the thing that was supposed to be better. And at the biggest moments tonight, it let you down. I mean, how much does that concern you going into next week against C.J. Stroud and the Texans?
Yeah, I think the thing about the Texans is their offense isn't dynamic. It's not great, but it's not horrible either. And, they do have a pretty good receiver. I think one of the things about it is if you have those kind of breakdowns against the Texans and you give up, what'd they give up tonight, 25 points or whatever it is, 24, 26 points, whatever it was. You give up that many points next week against the Texans, you're probably going to lose. And that could be just 2 or 3, breakdowns. So it's something you've got to really consider as you look through the whole game. Like, you really have to consider those things. Like, they've got to figure out why they are having so many of these miscommunications and breakdowns. Because there was a couple times, actually, that Lamar Jackson didn't see a guy that was running wide open. And that's, part of it as well.
Paul, let's talk about the run defense tonight. I think that was the headline was, yes, you had these breakdowns, but without them, you'd be talking about how you slowed Derrick Henry down in the second half of this game. He finishes the night with 126 yards on 20 carries, 6.3 per attempt. But, Paul, I'm not exactly sure what the split was because I don't know if they ever mentioned it on the broadcast for the final time, but I believe I remember Mike Tirico saying he was at 111 at one point late in the first half. So let's just take 111 as our working total. He got 15 yards from that point forward. They stopped him when it mattered in the fourth quarter. How much credit do you give the defense? Granted, he did get his yards in the first half, but he was pretty much a non-factor in the second half. And that's probably the reason you had a chance to win in kind of such a wild fashion, because you were getting into a shootout with these Ravens who, I don't know if that's their strength any more than it's the Steelers' strength.
Right, and I think that was part of it too. They fell behind, and it got a little bit tough sledding. And they always do. They always do this. John Harbaugh does this thing where he gets away from the run. I mean, they were only down 3 points. I thought that they could have kept trying to grind it out a little bit, and they just don't. They're willing to go away from that and put the ball in Lamar Jackson's hands. And again, I mean, Lamar Jackson made a couple of plays down the field, but I don't know that he was spectacular tonight. He made, a couple of throws to guys that were wide open. And that, to me, is one of those things where you look at it and you basically say, hey, I thought the defense outside of those breakdowns pretty much shut down the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, no, they did. I think you're completely right, Paul. I was going to say, if it wasn't for those 4 plays, who knows how the night goes. In the end, the Steelers outgained the Ravens 390 to 359. Let's pull up the play-by-play chart here, Paul, because I'll go through that second half and some of those breakdowns. Let's set it up, and then I'll look some of these up while you're talking. There were the breakdowns tonight individually. Jalen Ramsey on that first touchdown lets the receiver break loose for the touchdown. We saw Keanu Benton, Alex Highsmith meet at the quarterback on another one of those long touchdowns, fail to bring him down. It's some of what we saw tonight, just the nature of going against a guy like Lamar Jackson, who is one of the best athletes you've seen with that kind of arm. Can you forgive some of that given the type of opponent you were going against today? Or do you look at these guys and say, you just got to execute better, no excuses?
Yeah, no, I don't think you make an excuse there for them. Those weren't like the play where he shed the two tacklers and threw the ball down the field. That was a dynamic play that probably, maybe Josh Allen is the only guy on the planet that makes that play besides Lamar Jackson. But those other three actually, there was three of them that were just really bad, bad mistakes by the Steelers. And those things are inexcusable. You can't win games when you're going to, if you start playing against better teams, you can't win games with those kind of breakdowns. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that you have if you're the Steelers. You got to figure out how to stop having those kind of breakdowns because, even a guy like C.J. Stroud can exploit you if you know what I mean? If he's got guys running wide open with nobody there, to guard him.
Yeah, to put that in context, Paul, I did the math here real quickly. Those four big plays accounted for 178 of the Ravens' yards tonight. They finished the night with, I think we mentioned 359. So a little less than half in terms of the yardage was accounted for on those four big plays. So I guess let's talk about the defense going into next week and how we look at this performance, because it's really been a solid month of December for this Steelers defense. You go into Detroit, you shut them down. They were very good last week. They just didn't score enough points to beat Cleveland. Do you have faith that if they can clean some of those things up, those communications issues, that this we'll look back on this performance and say maybe it was part of that continuum in that late season growth?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Like, they have, they have shown growth. They're doing some things better. It's easy to sit there and say, well, if you take 3 plays away, but you can't take 3 plays away. There's 3 really big plays. And I think that's a big, big problem. It's just one of those things where I believe that, they're getting better. I think they're better against the run than they were. I think that they probably are better actually against the pass than they were. The problem is these miscommunications, they give up plays, big play after big play.
Paul, let's talk about Mike Tomlin. I think because a lot of people in the comments are talking about him. Oh, now he's definitely coming back next season. I think a lot of people looked at this game and said if the Steelers lose, they expected changes. I don't know that I did. I don't know that I buy any of the national reporting. But regardless, it doesn't matter. They're in the playoffs. They won the division. They finished 10-7. What's your view of Mike Tomlin and his standing with this organization, having gotten to this point? Has he gotten himself off any kind of possible hot seat by getting here, or does he still have pressure to win next week given the Steelers' long playoff drought?
I don't know that hot seat is the right word. I don't. I think there might be a part of him that decides he might be ready to move on somewhere. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably part of the story. I don't know that I don't know that it's going to happen, but I don't know that even if they lost tonight, he would have been, on the hot seat. It might be a thing of where he decided, well, it's time for me to move on. It's time for, whatever. His kids are out of school. He doesn't really have any reason to be here other than he's been here for so long. It's, it's where his family is. But my point is, sometimes these guys want to change. Sometimes the teams want to change. Maybe they come to one of these mutual decisions. I think that could still happen no matter what. I think they could win 2 or 3 playoff games and it could still happen. So I don't believe that he's on a hot seat. You know what I mean? Like, I think that if there's a change, it'll be as much because he wants to change as they want to change. And so I've thought that all along. I know all these guys have been reporting, oh, well, if they lose, it could be a change. I don't know that there's that kind of like feeling or momentum within the Steelers. I really don't.
No, I don't think that he's on a hot seat either. I think there was a perception that he was, but I never really bought into that. And I'll tell you what, Paul, I'll take a different tack. The way the guy we saw in the fourth quarter pumping up his defense, albeit before a bunch of breakdowns, but they showed on the NBC broadcast him, pounding his chest, hooting and hollering with the guys. And we know that that's the part of the game that he loves. And he seemed to be every bit engaged in this game. I believe one of the last images before NBC signed off of its regular coverage tonight was him doing the Donkey Kong. He was all fired up there on the field. He looks engaged to me. He looks like he still loves this, and he looks very validated by what he accomplished tonight, whether people are satisfied with it or not.
Well, it's I don't know. I mean, I validated. We're talking literally. This is how stupid some of this stuff gets. If the Ravens kicker doesn't completely gag on himself, we're having a completely different discussion. And the other part of it is I think the Ravens had 10 points going into the fourth quarter and scored 2 touchdowns on long plays. And then we're able to, get a 4th and 7 conversion to give themselves a chip shot field goal. Yes, I think Mike Tomlin is engaged. I think he's obviously a great football coach from the standpoint of that's what he wants to be. He wants to be a football coach. But again, I just don't know what is next for him. Obviously he could stay, and I think he'll have the opportunity to stay if he wants to. But the flip side of that, if you ask me, is that he might decide it's time for him to go somewhere else. I think too many people are taking the approach. Now, the flip side of it is, Adam, I think John Harbaugh will be fired tomorrow morning. I think he'll be one of the Black Monday coaches. I do. I think it's done. I think he's done.
You don't think there's any chance for him having come so close? And
No.
the same way we'd be having a completely different conversation if the kicker doesn't miss on the Steelers side. Would we not be having the same different conversation on the Ravens side?
I never felt like Mike Tomlin was on the hot seat.
No, I meant Harbaugh.
Well, what I'm saying is Harbaugh, I think they blew so many games this year. Forget about this game. They blew so many games this year. And, they had so many times they had an opportunity to win, and they had a bunch of games where they blew double-digit wins, double-digit leads. I mean, this game shouldn't have mattered. If you really look at the Ravens season, they should have been up 2 or 3 games, you know what I'm saying? But they weren't because they blow so many games because they're one of the worst. They're literally one of the dumbest teams I've ever watched. I mean, they had like 8 or 9 penalties in this game. They score a touchdown and then they kick the ball out of bounds. You know what I mean? I could go on and on and on about the dumb things they do, right? Lamar Jackson has a 40-yard run and there's a hold. You didn't even need to hold the guy. You know what I mean? They're dumb. And, they just seem to be a mentally weak team. I have no doubt. I'd be shocked if tomorrow night at this time we're still talking about John Harbaugh as the coach of the Ravens. I think he's gone.
Let's talk a little bit about Chris Boswell, Paul. He's been money for so long that it's hard to remember, him running into a difficult stretch, but he misses last week from 50+, misses the extra point tonight. I've been saying to people I've been watching, particularly in the NFL this year, Paul, that there seems to be a knuckle on a lot of kicks this year where it kind of like scoots out to the right and then hooks back in. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it seems to be like a trend among the kickers that they're getting more accuracy, but that ball knuckled never came back. Do you have any worries about him, going into next week that maybe I think he's still a great kicker. I don't think he's going to go, wild or anything, but in these games, it only takes one kick, and he does not seem to be as locked in as we've seen him be at different points in time this season.
Well, I mean, this is now 3 weeks in a row, isn't it, that he's missed a kick, or at least the third time when he's missed a kick that was important down the stretch. This was the extra point. Then he missed.
He missed in Detroit. He missed in Detroit as well. He missed from inside of 40 there, and then he missed from 50+ last week, and then the extra point this week.
Yeah, so I mean, this is like 3 games basically in a row where he has, he's missed important kicks. I still don't necessarily worry about him, but Adam, I mean, it's a little bit nervy. I mean, next week, if they have a kick where they need to win, I don't know, man. You can't. The stuff, he's good. He's really good, but if you're a kicker, we've seen it before where you get the yips a little bit. Guess what? Now you start to, it's in your head. And so hopefully he can get through it and go forward. I just feel like it's one of those situations where you still got a really, really, really good kicker there, but you really don't understand now what's going on other than it's mental.
Paul, we'll talk about next week here in a second. I think I want to talk about the AFC playoff field as a whole as well. But I did want to ask you about Aaron Rodgers here on the back half here, because there was a lot of talk on the NBC broadcast. Could it be done if they lose this game? They win tonight. They get DK Metcalf back next week. One way or the other, the season's going to end here. But he just authored this great moment and had that game-winning touchdown pass to Calvin Austin. One of the great Steelers wins of recent memory. Do you see enough left in him to come back next season? How much do you put into some of the reporting that has said he wants to come back? The Steelers want him back, especially with they're going to have 10 draft picks, Paul. And if he's a quarterback, they could surround him with some weapons. Do you think tonight is going to add to the momentum of him being the Steelers quarterback next year, regardless of what happens in the playoffs?
I think it all depends on Mike Tomlin, Adam. If Mike Tomlin's back, Aaron Rodgers will be back. If Mike Tomlin, for whatever reason, leaves or does, whatever we're talking about, mutual parting of right, whatever. If Mike Tomlin is not back, okay, Aaron Rodgers won't be back. But if Tomlin's back, Rodgers will be back. And maybe it'll be a thing where let's run it back one more time and see what happens. Listen, I see a guy that can still play. I know he's not what he was, but I see a guy that's still better than probably what? If there's 32 starting quarterbacks, he's probably better than about 22 of them. I might concede there's 5 to 7, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 that are better than him, but not many more than that. And so I wouldn't have a problem with him coming back, but again, I think it's going to be contingent mostly on what happens with Mike Tomlin. If Tomlin comes back, if Tomlin comes back, then I think Rodgers is definitely back.
Paul, let's talk about the playoffs. Let's set this up. Someone in the comments just pointed out Mike Tomlin's record on Monday Night Football at home, which you don't really expect to be relevant come playoff time, but here the Steelers are playing on Monday night against the Texans. They haven't lost, what was it? They said it a couple weeks ago during that Miami broadcast. Since 1991, they haven't lost on Monday night at home. Do you put any stock in that heading into next week, Paul? And what do you make of the Monday night date and getting that extra day to kind of prepare, knowing that the Steelers have some injuries that they've been dealing with?
Yeah, I think it helps them. I mean, obviously, I think being at home at night, I think that the Texans having to wait, and also, the Texans having to travel here, the weather at night, the fact that Steelers seem to play really well at prime time. Yeah, I absolutely think it's going to be a factor, and I think, it's going to be a pretty good factor for them. But to me, it just feels like they seem to really get up for those night games at home. They just do. They seem to play at a different level. And again, tonight was Sunday night, but kind of similar, kind of simple, kind of similar. I feel like, did they play a great game tonight? No, they didn't, but they made enough plays to win, and then they got lucky at the end, and sometimes that's enough.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Texans, Paul. You mentioned the defense is a strength for them. C.J. Stroud at quarterback, Nico Collins, a very solid player. What intrigues you about this matchup in this spot? The Texans are, I think, a fairly untested team in the postseason, have never had a whole lot of success at that time of year. The Steelers are the Steelers. Do you think there will be some mystique factor there for a franchise that is not used to being in the spot coming into a place like Acrisure Stadium?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because this version of the Steelers they don't have any mystique. They haven't won a playoff game in so long. You know what I mean? What's their mystique? I mean, they've got literally one guy on their team, two, if you count Boswell. They've got two guys who have actually experienced winning a playoff game in a Steelers uniform. Now they've had some other guys like Ramsey and Rodgers that have won playoff games. But in terms of, winning with the Steelers, they've got Cam Heyward and Boswell are the only two. So I don't think that mystique or any of that other stuff or history, especially when you consider that the Texans have won a playoff game in each of the last 2 years. So, which actually each of the last 2 years they've won a playoff game. So in some ways they have more experience, playing and winning in playoff games than the Steelers do. So I don't think, the mystique thing is valid at all, just because, again, this group of Steelers hadn't won anything.
Let's talk about this AFC playoff field, Paul. I got the odds from FanDuel right here. Denver is the favorite to win the conference at plus 230. Houston is third at plus 470, and the Steelers are dead last at plus 1,800. When you stack up this field, Paul, who intrigues you most as a Super Bowl pick, regardless of, the Steelers and whether they're the team? Who do you think is the biggest threat in this conference to win it?
Well, Denver is a really hard place to play for opponents, and the Broncos are really well coached, and they're going to play 2 home games, right? If they're, theoretically, I don't know if they're the best team, but that's a place where home field advantage, because of the altitude and all that other stuff, and the fact that Denver will be well rested and all that other good stuff. That to me feels like something that is really in their favor. Not that they haven't ever lost a playoff game at home. I'm not a believer in New England. I think that they're probably still a year away from really being a threat. The team that I think nobody talks about at all, which is amazing when you consider what they've done, and they've got 13 wins. And they've won, they've won how many in a row now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in a row is Jacksonville. And they seem to have all the elements you want, right? Got a quarterback who is finally coming into his own a little bit. They got a pretty good running back. They've got a great defense. Jacksonville's a team nobody is talking about. But there's a team that, to me, they could be pretty scary in the playoffs too.
Paul, final thoughts on this evening. Truly just a wild fourth quarter. Is there a game that sticks out in your mind that was as wild as that one from a Steelers perspective? I can't think of one off the top of my head that was quite that back and forth. Certainly you've had the dramatic moments. They brought up the immaculate extension with the Antonio Brown on Christmas. It was 2016, 2017, somewhere in that neighborhood. They've played exciting games. I don't know that I've ever seen one that went this back and forth for them in a fourth quarter in a long time.
Right. I don't know, man. Like every one of the Ravens games seemed to come down to the last play every time they play the Ravens. So I'd have to think about that, but they've had a number of those. Do you remember the one Cowboys game that was here where the Cowboys, I think Ben did a fake spike, right? And they scored a touchdown, and the Cowboys came back and scored a touchdown, and it was a crazy game in the fourth quarter, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. That game was probably similar to this, but you're right. This was a crazy game. Kind of amazing. All of the conspiracy theorists out there about the NFL being scripted, they got their wish because the last game.
They've been in the comments tonight, Paul. I think
that's what I'm saying. The last game of the year comes down to the last play, and it's a missed field goal. I don't know. I just it is what it is. I feel bad for that kid. He's a rookie, isn't he? He's a young guy.
Yeah.
But hey, it goes to show you got to have a kicker that can make kicks, especially if you're a team like the Ravens or the Steelers that play close games all the time.
Yes. So at the end of a wild night here, we want to thank you all for joining us. We got a great crowd tonight. We want to remind you, if you're just joining us for the first time, please subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more coming your way from Acrisure Stadium. Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac will wrap things up with their recap video. We'll try to get some sound from the Steelers locker room. Tomorrow, the North Shore Drive, Christopher Carter will be back with Ray. So lots more reaction to come for this game. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And please consider checking out our written coverage over at post-gazette.com. Going to be an avalanche of content there, Paul. We're all going to be scrambling to get out as much copy as we can for everyone. So subscribe. It's a great time to hop on board with the playoffs beginning. And with that, we're going to sign off for the night. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.